When I started introducing you to the idea of harmony, I promised even that if you learnt just a few different flavours of major and minor triad, you'd be able to harmonise or play along with pretty much any melody that you can imagine. Now, before I can do that, I'm going to need to explain a little bit about something called key. Now, the key of a piece of music is the scale that is being used most centrally at that particular point in the music. So it might change. A key is not necessarily set for the entire piece of music. Sometimes it changes, and this is called modulation, and we may look at this in due course. But for a lot of pieces of music, particularly simple pieces of music that we start learning when we start learning music, they're generally focused around one particular scale. So take a listen to this piece of music. That piece of music, which I'm sure you know very well, generally focused around the notes of the C major scale. Another thing to take into consideration is that it started and finished on the note of C, and that can be also a very good indication that a piece is focused on a scale that has that letter name. So if we both see that it uses the notes of the C major scale and also finishes on a C, and there's our C, we can take a pretty sure guess that it's going to be in the key of C major. If we want to add harmony to that melody, what we need to do is we need to use triads that are built up of notes that come from the scale of the key that we're in. So hopefully that doesn't sound too complicated. We just established that we're in the key of C major. So I'm going to write the notes of the C major scale out here at the bottom of the screen. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And so if we're using this particular scale in our music, we're going to want to harmonize it with triads that also make use of notes from this scale. Now, the easiest one to do, of course, is the first scale degree. In fact, I might just write in the other scale degrees here. Hopefully we'll see that it's very easy to find some triads that we already know that are built on top of notes from this particular scale. We can do this very easily, for example, on the first scale degree, because if we add in an E and a G, making our very familiar C major triad, we'll see that we're using notes from this particular scale because they're scale degrees 1, 3 and 5 coming together to make this C major triad. We can do the same thing trying to build a triad on this fourth scale degree. So let's try and do that. So let's try, and if we do that, we can take F, A and C and build another familiar triad. That is the triad of F major. So it's an F major triad that we can build, and again we haven't used any ingredients outside of this set of notes, the C major scale. And finally, just as an example, but also we'll find that these triads are particularly important to this scale, we'll build one on the fifth degree of the scale, which is this G here. And if we do that, we'll see that we get a G major triad, and that is also built from the notes. Here they are, they go over the end of the scale, but here we are. Here's G, B, and D. We could always put a D here as well to make our G major triad. So actually just knowing these three triads, here we've got C, C major, F major, and G major, we can go a very long way to harmonizing a piece that is written in the key of C major, meaning that it makes use of the C major scale. And just to prove that that is the case, I will do this for you now. Here's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star one more time, but this time I'm going to harmonize it using just the C, F and G major triads. you'll see there that I was able to harmonize or play chords along with that melody using only the triads of C major, F major and G major, and that's because these triads are very, very central and important to the key of C major, and in fact they're known as the primary triads. If you know the primary triads, or the triads that are built on the first, fourth and fifth degrees of any scale, you'll be able to harmonize any melody that's being played using the notes of that scale. And the same thing is true of a minor scale. So let's have a look at that now. As always, just to make things relatively straightforward, and we can always do examples in the future that make use of more keys than this, but let's start by having a look at A minor. You'll remember that I taught you 3 different flavors of the A minor scale. Now when we want to work with chords and harmony, we're going to use the harmonic flavor, because that gives us the right set of notes to build the triads that we're going to need to harmonize A minor melodies, so melodies using the A minor scale. First of all, let's just write out the scale down here. Now hopefully you'll remember that in our A harmonic minor scale we did something special to the 7th note of the scale. We raised it up a semitone to make it a G sharp instead of a G. So again, if we want to harmonize in the most basic way possible a melody that makes use of the A minor scale, in other words, a melody that's in the key of A minor, we need to use the primary triads. And just like in the major scale, these are going to be triads built on the 1st, 4th and 5th degrees of the scale, making use of notes taken from the scale. So let's get started and build a triad on A, making use of notes from the scale. So we've got A, C and E, and that gives us an A minor triad. Sounds a bit like this. There we go. Now the A major flavour would have a C sharp in it, but as you can see there's no C sharp in this scale, so we're using an A minor triad because it's going to fit much more closely to the scale that we're using. And moving along to this D here, we want to build a triad on top of that, making use of notes from the A minor scale, so it's going to be D, F and A, which sounds something like that. And I hope you'll be able to recognise that too is a minor triad. In fact, it is the D minor triad. And finally, we're going to build a triad on this 5th degree of the scale, which here is an E. Now, we're going to use a G sharp here because it's in our scale. We made it a G sharp as part of our A harmonic minor scale. And we're also going to use a B. And this will build for us this triad. Now you might be thinking, well, that sounds very different to the other 2 that we're using, and you are exactly correct, because in this case we are playing an E major triad. So just to show this works in minor keys as well as major keys, I'm going to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, this time in a minor key, making use of the notes of the A minor scale. And I will put some of these related primary triads with it, and hopefully you'll feel that it all fits together reasonably well. Hopefully your mind is now blown with the immense possibilities that lie in some very, very simple triads. I hope it wasn't too much detail, and I'll just go over some of the key ideas once again. So to harmonise any piece that we want, any melody that we like, we need to first of all work out the key of that melody, and you hopefully will be able to work that out by looking at sort of things like what note does it start on and finish on. Sometimes that can be a really good indication, and also what notes does it generally use, and hopefully from that, or alternatively you can just ask someone or look on the internet and find out the key of a particular piece of music. And once you know the key of a piece of music, if you identify the primary triads that are related to that key, you'll be able to harmonize it. It'll take a bit of experimentation, and hopefully I can think of some creative ways that you can start to explore that. But if you know these primary triads, you should be able to put them together with your melody and come up with something that sounds okay. It won't sound amazing, and we'll need to look at more ways to make harmony more exciting than just using the triads, but they will fit. That's the main thing. And so if it is a major key, so it's using the notes of a major scale, your primary triads are going to be built on the 1st, 4th, and 5th degrees of the scale, and they will all be major chords. So we looked at our example where we used the primary triads of C, F, and G major. So this was a C major triad, an F major triad, and a G major triad. If we've discovered that our piece is using a minor scale, so it's in a minor key, we're going to also use the triads built on top of the 1st, 4th, and 5th scale degrees. But because of the different notes in the minor scale, and we only want to use notes that are in the scales that we're playing in, so it's no good playing C minor because that has an E flat in it, and that's not in a C major scale. C major scale only has the white notes. So equally in a minor scale, we're going to want to play some minor chords, and the 1st and 4th will be minor, so using the minor triad, and the 5th will be major. And in our example, we chose A minor. And so that means that the 1st triad, the triad built on the 1st degree of the scale, will be A minor. The triad built on the 4th degree of the scale will be D minor. And the triad built on the 5th degree of the scale will be E major. How are people able to harmonize any melody on the guitar just by knowing 3 chords? Well, here's your answer. Because they've learnt the primary triads, and then they just sing all the music they're ever going to sing in the same key. Guitarists very often learn G, C, and D. And these are, of course, the primary triads. So G major, C major, and D major. They're the primary triads of G major. And so hopefully that's the secret as to how we get started with harmonizing melodies by just a few simple triads.